Welcome to Dark Speak, where secrets never sleep, and the darkness always has something to say. 3 true spiritual experiences in the suburbs that will haunt you. It happened many years ago, when I was living with my parents in an old house on the outskirts of Honolulu town. I was only 17 years old. On a seemingly normal weekend, my parents suddenly left for a few days, leaving me alone in the house. This had never happened before. They were introverted, rarely went away, and I could never remember a time when both of them had been away from the house for so long. I considered this a rare opportunity to enjoy the freedom I had longed for. That night, I invited Lyra, my rebellious girlfriend, to my house. Lyra was mischievous, always finding ways to turn every situation into a game. She was not afraid of anything, and it was that recklessness that both attracted and made me feel uneasy. When she stepped into the backyard, her eyes stopped at the hot tub glowing in the dark. The moon shone on the water, making the surface of the water look like a ghostly mirror. Lyra chuckled, suggesting that we try something that no one would normally dare to do. I hesitated, afraid that the neighbors might see, but then I knew they never paid attention to this place. I agreed, and from that moment on, the space seemed to change. As I stepped into the warm water, I felt a chill down my spine, as if a cold current was rising from the bottom of the tub. Lyra didn't notice. She laughed loudly, joking as if this world was all we had. But the longer I stayed, the more strange noises I heard. Soft whispers from behind the trees. Very slow footsteps on the gravel in the distance. I raised my head and looked around, but saw no one. Only the night wind blew, but the wind couldn't create those sounds. That night, when we got back to the house, we closed the door and lay on the sofa watching a movie. The screen flickered, reflecting in the large window. I suddenly saw a figure standing right outside the yard, tall and thin, silently looking in. I turned around in panic, but there was no one. Lyra said I was imagining it, but then there was a light knock on the glass door, so clear that we were both stunned. I turned on the yard light, but outside there was only a dark void and the chirping of crickets. That night we hardly slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard footsteps in the hallway, whispers close to my ear, even though there was no one in the house but us. Lyra, bold as she was, also became quiet, her eyes more bewildered than ever. And then, when the clock struck nearly 3 in the morning, I opened my eyes because I felt someone standing right next to me. In the dim light from the nightlight, I saw a woman with long, wet hair and torn clothes, bending her head right at the edge of the sofa where we lay. Her face was pale. Her eyes were deep black holes like bottomless pits. I stood still, my breath caught in my throat. Lyra saw it too. She screamed, but the sound was immediately swallowed up in the dense space. The figure disappeared in the blink of an eye, but the musty stench still lingered around the room. We did not dare to sleep until dawn. The next morning, I discovered long, streak water on the floor near the back door, leading from the hot water tank into the living room. The scary thing was that my parents had never told me that anyone had ever drowned in this house. But that day, in the light of day, I suddenly remembered, many years ago, there was a rumor about a woman in town who had mysteriously disappeared. It is said that she often wandered the suburbs, and on the last night before she disappeared, someone saw her shadow standing by a pool in the moonlight. I never dared to mention that to my parents. And from that night on, that house was no longer a home for me, but a place that contained ghosts of the past. Lyra and I had swum in the pool behind the house many times before, but we had never done anything as out of line as that night. I was raised in a disciplined way, always a good child, rarely daring to bend familiar principles. Sometimes I think that it was my gentleness that made me so easily swept away by others. Lyra was different. She knew how to impose her enthusiasm on the person opposite, and I, no matter how hesitant, was eventually swept away by her impulsive energy. We plunged into the pool, laughing loudly under the summer sky, the water droplets sparkling like dew. The warm water embraced our bodies, in stark contrast to the cool air outside. In that moment, I thought everything was perfect, almost like a gentle dream. To put it simply, the pool was located right behind the large glass windows of the living room. Because the lights were still on inside the house and the outside was dark, From under the water, we could see every corner inside, just like a lit dollhouse. At first, the scene made me feel safe, as if we were still connected to the familiar living space, even though we were outdoors. But that peace quickly collapsed. While Lyra was rambling on about something, I glanced towards the living room, and immediately my heart stopped. On the deepest wall of the room, a shadow just passed by. It was faint but clearly moving, as if someone were walking leisurely through my own house. I froze, my eyes following the figure until it disappeared into the darkness of the house. My breathing quickened, panic rising in my throat. I didn't want to scare Lyra, but the uneasiness inside me was screaming. I leaned close to her ear, whispering that we needed to leave the pool immediately. She didn't ask why, just nodded silently. Swimming after me, we stepped out, wiping ourselves hastily in the dark, trying not to make a sound. I took Lyra into the small shed next to the pool, telling her to turn off all the lights and be absolutely quiet until I returned. The usual mischievousness on her face disappeared completely, replaced by a suppressed panic. I knew she was scared, but I tried to keep calm. As for me, my heart felt like it was about to jump out of my chest, every muscle tensing from an invisible obsession. Outside, the house was still lit, but it no longer felt like a familiar place. It was like a giant monster hiding inside of some creature I didn't know. And I, the owner of the house, was standing outside, looking on helplessly. Adrenaline surged in my chest as I reached for the fruit knife on the wooden cabinet next to the bed. I told Lyra to stay in the small storage room, and I rushed out into the hallway. I walked quickly, trying to keep my footsteps quiet. My heart was pounding in my ears, threatening to tear my chest apart. When I reached the front door, I froze. The door was wide open, the night wind blowing in, making the curtains rustle. Someone had clearly broken in, but now he was gone. I stood rooted to the spot in the doorway, feeling as if an invisible pair of eyes were watching me from the darkness outside. I didn't call the police, partly because I knew they wouldn't find anything, and partly because something told me that it wasn't just human that had entered. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and went back inside, determined to protect Lyra at all costs. The next morning, as the sun streamed through glass, I realized a true horror. All the knives in the kitchen were gone. Every single one, big and small, from chopping knives to paring knives to the tiniest blades, gone. There was also some cash, a few old watches, some worthless electronics. But it was the missing knives that chilled me. It was as if the intruder had left a message, a silent threat, but I could never quite understand what it meant. When my parents returned, I told them what had happened. They listened with an uncanny calm. There was no reproach, no sign of doubt. Instead, they just nodded silently, as if they had known this would happen one day. It was that strange reaction that made me even more uneasy. Many years passed, and I still could not forget that experience. And then, when it seemed like everything would fade away, another time, during my student life, that haunting feeling returned. At that time, I was studying at Delon Academy, a school located in a quiet suburb, where many ghost stories were passed down among students. During the annual Lantern Festival, the entire campus was filled with music, games, and lights, just like a miniature town in the middle of the night. My friends and I stayed late, drank some wine, and immersed ourselves in crowd. The lively atmosphere made me forget a bit about the darkness that still lurked around me. Around 3 a.m, I separated from my friends and returned to the Meteorite dormitory alone, a building located on the edge of campus, next to a small forest where people were often rumored to have gone missing. The road was deserted, the streetlights scattered, giving me the feeling of walking through a dim maze. I swiped my dorm card, opened the door, and entered the lobby. At first, I didn't pay any attention, but then, in the dim yellow light, I saw someone sitting in the waiting chair. This was not unusual, since college dormitories often had people staying up until dawn. But that guy, he was wearing a tight black mask, covering his entire face. He didn't speak, didn't move, just sat motionless like a statue, his head slightly tilted towards me. It only took me a second to realize the abnormality. No one in their right mind would sit like that at this moment. I stopped, every hair on my neck standing up. The familiar feeling from that day came flooding back. The feeling that something didn't belong to this world, but was right in front of me. I stood frozen at the entrance to the waiting room, my whole body frozen. This situation was completely meaningless. I didn't know who he was, why he was wearing a mask, and I also didn't understand why he was sitting there so still. But fear surged through me like a tidal wave. Suddenly, he jumped up from his chair with a twist so fast that I didn't have time to react. In that moment, I didn't think about anything else. Just turned and ran down the hallway, rushed into the nearest bathroom, and locked the door tightly. I sat there, my heart pounding, my breath coming in short gasps, my back pressed against the cold door. At least 5 minutes passed, the hallway gradually falling into absolute silence. No more footsteps, no other sounds. Just a heavy silence, as if waiting for me to get out. Finally, I opened the door and looked around. The hallway was empty. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking he had left. I stepped out, trying to stay calm, not daring to run for fear that my panic would make me lose control. I chose to go around to another exit, hoping to get out of the dormitory as soon as possible. But when I reached the side door, I froze again. He was still sitting there, in the waiting room, his black mask shining, his eyes lifeless behind the fabric. The bicycle was parked right in front of the door, and worse, a chair was jammed between the door frame and the wall, as if to prevent me from escaping. I tightened my grip on the pepper spray hanging from my keychain. I didn't point at him, just held it up as a warning. My heart was pounding so hard that my ears were ringing. I walked past silently. He didn't stop me, didn't move, didn't even bother to glance over. The way he sat there, as if waiting for me to come closer, so I could see more clearly to face him behind the mask, made my fear even more extreme. As if my fear was the ultimate goal. I didn't dare look back. I pushed open the other door, stepped out, and ran straight toward Fonghack Avenue. I thought I was safe until I heard the screech of tires on the pavement behind me. 3 other people, also wearing masks, appeared on old bicycles. They didn't touch me, but pressed close to my sides, giggling and uttering incomprehensible, distorted words. Some of them brandished what looked like guns, the metal glinting in the yellow streetlights. I didn't know if they were real or fake, but just looking at them was enough to make my blood freeze. They circled around me, just a few inches away, like predators circling their prey. I tried to ignore them and walked as fast as I could toward the main road. Finally, when I got close to another dormitory, I texted a friend. He immediately ran out, took me back, and only when someone came along did they disappear into the darkness. That night, I didn't call the police. I wasn't hurt, but the fear was still imprinted in my every breath. The biggest haunting thing wasn't the masked men or the weapons in their hands, but the deadly silence as they left. It was as if it was all some kind of ritual, and I had been chosen to witness it. The next morning, when I told my mother what had happened, she just looked at me for a long time and said something that sent a chill down my spine. We don't always meet living people when we walk down the street. Sometimes, those strangers themselves aren't entirely of this world. The girl finally reported the incident. That night, several male friends of mine also texted me that they had been approached by a group of masked men, some of whom even pulled out handguns. No one was hurt, but it was enough for the campus police to start taking the matter seriously. Rumors spread quickly throughout the suburbs of Changyuan. Some said it was just a bunch of local youths who liked to scare people. Others believed that there were strangers who weren't students, armed and hiding in the dormitory that night. For me, from then on, every step alone at night became torture. The next story happened 2 summers ago, when I was still seeing a girl named Lyra. I kept it a secret for a long time, not because I was embarrassed, but because I didn't want to accidentally reveal any private information about her or her family. Now that we've been broken up for over a year, I dare tell her. That summer, Lyra worked as a counselor at a children's camp inside the city. The job wasn't close to home, requiring her to drive more than 20 minutes each day from a quiet, affluent suburb where her family lived. Although I never understood why she loved the job so much, Lyra had always had a strange passion for it. Her family home was exactly what she imagined luxury would be. A 3-story mansion with high ceilings and a large yard that could host any event. So when the counselors discussed the end-of-season party, Lyra's house immediately became the perfect choice. To be exact, it wasn't the first time her family had held such a party, but it was the first time I attended it. Lyra's parents often went on business trips. Their relationship was strange, like three colleagues living under one roof, not parents and children. Cold, dry, lacking warmth. That day, the villa was filled with lights and laughter. The party ended late. I helped Lyra clean up. When the last people left, it was past midnight. In the spacious house, there were only the two of us, and darkness covered every deep hallway. While Lyra took the trash bag to the backyard, I was alone collecting bottles in the living room. Just then, I heard footsteps on the second floor. The sound would creaking softly, regularly, then suddenly stopped right above my head. I thought it was Lyra, so I called out. There was no answer. The footsteps echoed again, faster this time, stretching along the hallway upstairs. I quickly grabbed a glass jar and walked to the foot of the stairs. The upper floor was dark. All the lights were off, but I could clearly see a figure standing at the top of the stairs, motionless. When I blinked, the figure disappeared. Lyra returned to the house just a few seconds later, and as soon as she put down the trash bag, she saw my pale face. I said nothing, just told her to go to bed early. But that night, I hardly slept because in the silence, the footsteps continued to echo somewhere on the third floor where we had never set foot. Everything in the villa that day revolved around showing off, superficial handshakes and forced smiles. Anyone who looked at it could easily see that the three people in Lyra's family were like three distorted mirrors of the same personality. Arrogant, insecure, hating to be compared but reflecting on each other. This description sounds a bit harsh, but it was the naked truth of all the people. Lyra's father was the most approachable, and I remember his easygoing nature. But the affection in the house was always faint, like incense smoke quickly fading in the wind. The party was packed. Music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses echoed to the 3 floors of the house, then out into the large courtyard behind. Most of the guests were amiable and friendly, except for one man. His name was Nestor. As soon as he entered, I had a bad feeling. His voice was loud, his manner was overconfident, and his eyes were fixed on Lyra. He made no secret of his blatant flirtation, as if my presence were air. I felt my blood boil, but I tried to keep my cool. Lyra was someone I trusted, even though she had a habit of being too friendly with strange men, a rift in our relationship that I never knew how to mend. Instead of confronting Nestor directly, I chose another approach. I laughed and talked, pouring him more wine every time his glass was empty. Before long, Nestor was drinking faster than he should have. I knew I could handle more because of my ridiculous tolerance for alcohol, and he was starting to stagger. My plan worked better than I had expected. When the clock struck midnight, Nestor collapsed on the sofa in the basement, mouth agape, drool soaking his pillow. I was secretly pleased, but Lyra looked at me with a cold gaze. She knew exactly what I had done, and accused me of doing it on purpose. After a few awkward denials, I was forced to admit part of it. We argued lightly, not too loudly, but I still felt that my little trick had ruined some of the fun of the party. As the night wore on, the house became more chaotic, the loud music mixed with the strong smell of beer and alcohol. I felt suffocated, so I went outside to get some fresh air. The cool summer night air swirled around the iron gate, a quiet contrast to the noise inside. I leaned against Lyra's car and looked up at the starry sky. And then I saw him. A figure stood motionless at the far edge of the block, in the flickering light of the street light at the end of the alley. He didn't move, didn't blink. He just stood there, as if he had been watching us for a long time. At that moment, a chill ran down my spine. I squinted, trying to make out the man's face, but the dim light of the streetlight did nothing but create an unnaturally long shadow, as if his body was stretched out on the ground. I decided to step closer. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was a rash confidence or some stupid curiosity. If I had been more rational, I would have gone back inside. I said, trying to sound friendly but firm, "Hey, do you need any help?" The man took a few slow steps toward me and stopped. It was a man, but the darkness made it impossible to make out any features. He was silent for a long time, then suddenly spoke in a hoarse voice. "Are your parents home?" The question made me shiver. not only because of the content, but also because of the way he said it, as if he already knew the answer. Before I could react, he immediately repeated it, this time calling Lyra's parents by name. In that moment, every piece of doubt that had been in my heart for so long suddenly came true. I was forced to lie, saying that my parents were in the house and would be down soon. Part of me knew that he could tell that I didn't live here, but I still hoped that would be enough to stop him from doing something bad. He nodded slightly, then said only one short sentence. Okay. Immediately after that, he turned and walked away. I thought he would walk towards a car or another house, but he didn't. He kept walking slowly until his figure disappeared into the darkness. I stood there for a long time, eyes straining to follow him, but the darkness had swallowed him. There was something unusual, as if all his actions were just to instill in me an indescribable sense of unease. I took a deep breath, then reluctantly returned to the mansion. Not wanting to face the noisy crowd anymore, I quietly went down to the basement. There was a ping-pong table, a few people gathered around chatting softly. The room was quiet in stark contrast to the floor above, where music still pierced the air. I felt more comfortable being able to hear every word instead of just screaming, but that feeling of peace didn't last long. A doorbell rang, clear and sharp, penetrating the thick walls. At first I didn't pay it any attention. This was a party after all. People coming and going was normal. But right after the bell rang, the room suddenly became strangely quiet. The people around me also stopped talking, as if they all sensed something unusual had just come to the door. But deep in my subconscious, there was a silent knock, tugging at my nerves as if warning me that I had missed something extremely important. Still unconsciously hitting the ping-pong ball back and forth, I finally realized Lyra had instructed everyone to enter through the back door. The front door had never been used during the party, and it didn't have a bell. That meant someone had deliberately chosen that entrance and had rung the bell, something that absolutely shouldn't have happened. The feeling of unease rose like a wave. I excused myself from the game, walked quickly up the stairs, reassuring myself that I was probably just overreacting. But deep down I knew something was wrong. When I passed Lyra's room, I saw her asleep on the bed, still wearing her party clothes. Her breathing was steady, completely oblivious to the chaos going on around her. A thought flashed through my mind. I was probably the only sane person in the house. I gently turned off her light, closed the door, and continued toward the front door. There, I found a girl named Mara, her face flushed, her breath heavy with alcohol. I asked her if she knew who had rung the doorbell. Mara smiled foolishly, swaying, her words broken. After a moment, she blurted out that there was an old man standing outside the door, claiming to be a family friend, saying he needed to return something he had borrowed. My heart sank. I shouted, my voice cracking with panic. "You let him in?" Mara shrugged. Her eyes glazed over and walked away, as if it had nothing to do with her. I rushed upstairs into Lyra's parents' room, and my worst fear was instantly realized. Drawers were open, jewelry boxes were empty, clothes were thrown out of the closet as if someone had gone through every corner. A chill ran down my spine. He had broken in, and he had taken what he wanted. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. But as my hand touched the doorknob, my eyes caught the mirror behind me, and for a split second, I saw a blur of movement in it. A shadow passed behind me, too fast for my brain to process. I turned around, but it was too late. A powerful force slammed into me, forcing me to the floor. The air in my lungs was forced out in a choking scream. I tried to look, but his face was completely obscured by darkness. All I could feel was his cold breath on my ear and his rough hand on my shoulder, as if he had been waiting for this moment. But the encounter left a heavy aftershock. I didn't want to stay awake any longer, nor did I have the strength to push through the chaos in that house. Nor did I want to ruin the party by chasing everyone away myself. So I pulled out my phone, called the police, and asked them to come and disperse the crowd. The local officers knew Lyra's family, so they didn't intend to make a scene, but showed up with a gentle but firm attitude. As soon as the car horn sounded, the whole house suddenly became chaotic, with bewildered faces jostling for the exit. When the last door closed, the large house fell into an eerie silence. I silently thanked them for their presence, but there was still a heavy void in my heart, as if the danger had never left. After the police left, I trudged down to the basement, shaking Rian, who had collapsed on the couch from the alcohol, to get him out of there. He staggered and vomited at the bottom of the stairs before stuttering to call a cab. I watched him disappear through the door, with a vague sense that this would be the last time he would be involved in this story. The next morning, Lyra was forced to call her parents, telling them everything. Their anger poured through the receiver, full of anger and frustration. But Lyra just sat there, leaning against the bed, her eyes blank. Her parents' voices were screaming on the phone, and she only moved her lips slightly, as if listening to a foreign language. The family never called the police back. There were no cameras in the house, and in their eyes, the whole thing was a waste of time. I sat in the corner of the room, watching Lyra bury her head in the pillow, her tangled hair covering most of her face, and there was only one haunting question. How did the man know for sure that her parents weren't home? The more I thought about it, the more I was convinced that he wasn't a random burglar. He knew too much, knew the habits, the routine, even the empty spaces in this house. If he had searched every drawer, every corner of the cupboard, then he had entered, watched, waited. That night not only exposed my helplessness, but also revealed a part of the truth about Lyra that I had stubbornly ignored. Indifference, disdain for everything, all like warning signs that I had denied. And then, when I was about to turn away, my eyes accidentally caught the mirror hanging on the wall. The mottled glass reflected the dim bedroom, and in that brief moment, I swear I saw a figure standing right behind Lyra, eyes shining brightly in the darkness. I blinked. Only the bed and her collapsed body remained. But deep down, I knew that guy had never left. The story ends here. Goodbye and see you in the next video.